So, guys, I want to review The Wild Bunch, and part of me, I'm feeling a little sick this morning, so I'm just doing it from bed. Last night at the Metrograph in New York City, they're doing a film series, so they're showing a bunch of westerns and a bunch of samurai films. And one of the ones they were showing last night was The Wild Bunch, and it's a film directed by Sam Peckinpah, and it's considered one of the greatest Western films ever made, and definitely one of the most important ones because before this film was made, you saw a lot of westerns where it had that American story of the Western hero fighting against the villains. And when you look at films like Good, the Bad, the Ugly, they were very popular in Italy. They didn't get a lot of showtime in the States. So this was kind of like the first Western film with like villains being the heroes released in the United States to a very broad audience. And it actually was nominated for Best Screenplay. And that's the only time Sam Peckinpah personally was nominated for an Oscar. It lost to Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. And then his film Straw Dogs was nominated for Best Score in 1971. It lost to Shaft. But but definitely this was like the film that made Sam Peckinpah famous, and unfortunately, he didn't really have that good of a career because he had personal drug and alcohol problems on film sets. So the Wild Bunch is about these a band of mercenary criminals that go around and they rob a village, and then after that they're kind of being hunted down, and as they're like escaping, like the men that are hunting them down, they make friends with like a general in Mexico, and they do a favor for him, which is steal ammunition. And then at the end of the film, there's like this standoff that happens, and they all die. So there's a lot of different themes about this, and I think that what happens is when you have villains as a main character, you really have to go off the theme of the villain's morality, and they have some ideas like you stick together. A man's word is as good as who he promises it to, and that also when there are situations to fight, you fight, even if it's a situation where you're gonna lose. And I think that a lot of this is an allegory for the Vietnam War because a lot of people felt that way, where it is a pointless where you're just told to fight, even though a lot of Americans were dying over there, and ultimately, if they just didn't have a war in the first place, a lot of lives would have been saved. Um, so it's kind of like an allegory to that. And then all the violence in the film, I think, is kind of an allegory to the war you see in Vietnam because you see a lot of innocent people get killed in the shootouts in the Wild Bunch, and you also see like paid mercenaries to take down the Wild Bunch, actually shoot and kill innocent people to actually get at the Wild Bunch. And the thing that happens is that it kind of alludes to the Vietnam War, where the U.S. were trying to like kill Viet Cong, and they had a hard time, so they're dropping napalm or shooting up villages or shooting villages from the sky, like you see in Full Metal Jacket and in Apocalypse Now. And most of the time, they killed civilians, not the Viet Cong army. So it kind of alluded to that, and then also too that some of the people that are tracking down the Wild Bunch, like including one of them, if he didn't track them down like 30 days, he'd be sent back to a Mexican prison where he would be like whipped and tortured again. So that can kind of be an allegory for how the government's like, you know what, we want to kind of have this Vietnam War, and we want to have the result that we want to have, which is we save Vietnam from communism. And if we don't have it, it's going to make us look bad, or it's going to make us look like kind of corrupt and stuff like that. So I think that there's a lot of parallels between the Vietnam War and what was going on, and the Wild Bunch, and then also too that 1969 was probably one of the most important years in American history with Woodstock, the moon landing, Richard Nixon becoming president, a lot of people not liking the Vietnam War, and then also people just feeling that the government wasn't something to trust. Like he said, like maybe around 1969, that generation became the last generation to ever really trust the U.S. government. So this movie really alludes to that. And I would also talk about some other things about the Wild Bunch. Technically, that I really like the opening of the film, like because the music's really somber, so it gives you a sense that this is going to be a very you know sad story. And then also too in that it opens with a bunch of kids taking two scorpions and putting them in a pile of fire ants. And then also later in the movie, they actually set the fire ants, the scorpions being cannibalized on fire. And one of the reasons why that Peckinpah chose that was because usually in a lot of old Western films, you would see these beautiful landscapes or John Wayne or other heroes just riding on horses and really upbeat music. So this was kind of like an anti-Western or revisionist where you're doing things the opposite way. So he's trying to give you a sense of this is kind of morbid. This is going to be a violent story. This is going to be disturbing. And I think ultimately what he was saying too is that the ultimate goal of the film was a sense of realism to be like when you want to know what those times are like. It was a lot of like innocent killing of people and people being reckless with weapons, and also that even if they're trying to track down somebody like a bandit or whatever, when you're doing a shootout you're killing innocent people because you're trying to get the bad guy. So no, he was trying to like really establish even from the opening scene that this wasn't a pleasant story. And then also too, like there's like three or four scenes in the whole movie that have like violent shootouts. Like the opening scene is like the robbery in the village, and they do a great job like building tension with that. And then the next scene is that one of the next scenes is that like somebody has like a Gatling gun or a machine gun and they don't know how to use it, so they're shooting into like a Mexican village, but unfortunately nobody gets killed, but it does a lot of damage. And then there's another like couple of scenes like there's like a train shootout, and then there's also another shootout in another village. Then at the end is the Battle of the Bloody Porch, which is kind of like the most violent scene in the movie, but I kind of like how it kind of has a bunch of different violent scenes because, unlike Bonnie and Clyde, where the ending is super violent, when you kind of establish it throughout a movie, you're kind of almost it almost feels more realistic, not like oh well, we're gonna throw this in. So that's how I kind of feel about it. I also will say that another thing is that the editing is done very well. Like I think that in a lot of scenes with the shootouts, they do a great job. Like especially in the opening, like you see like this parade of people, like they're trying to like they're anti-alcoholism, and you see like them kind of like like singing, having a good time singing songs and trying to get their life together. And you see kids playing outside, and then they spend so much time on that when you see the Wild Bunch in a bank with a bunch of guns, like planning their next step, and then they decide that okay, the best thing to do is to start a shootout with all those people running around outside, or people parading outside. That's the best option. It kind of gives you a sense of tension, like here are innocent people who want to do the right thing. They're gonna get gunned down, and then also you side with the Wild Bunch because they're funny, they're entertaining people, and then actually the people on top of the roof who want to shoot at them, the hired like mercenaries, they're kind of like annoying, and then also they're like they're being sneaky as well. But sometimes I think that in some movies, we don't like if we want to be sneaky, we don't like somebody trying to like out sneak us. So that's kind of like a human thing. So I think like Peckinpah does a good job of establishing who's a good guy, who's a bad guy, and how to kind of like root for the bad guys almost. So I would kind of say that he does a great job with that, but he also does a great job of just showing that you also feel like you don't want to watch it, like you don't want to watch the train wreck because you don't want to see innocent people get be gunned down, and that's kind of what happens. And he also does a lot of great shot in his editing. Like he does slow motion a lot. He does a lot of facial reactions. Like you're seeing like these two kids hugging each other, and you see like how like scared and shocked that they are when they see all the death around them, and that if they make one wrong move, they can easily be run over by a horse or whatever. I think that also the another thing about this film is really the cinematography is done very very well. And I also would say that another thing with the film is that it's definitely well directed. There's a lot of great acting. There's some humor with the characters, and also too that the cinematography is done very well. Like I think I love the Mexican landscapes and the Texas landscapes, and they did a great job of making you actually feel like you were in the past. I think there's some things I don't like about the film. I think the one thing I didn't like is that one of the Mexican guards has a car, so it kind of really confused me because I think this was taking place in the 1800s. They didn't late 1800s. They didn't have cars until I think the 1920s, if I'm correct. I didn't think they have automobiles probably until like the 1900s or tens, but so it kind of confused me a little bit because when you look at like all the Wild West stuff, you think that's in the 1860s, and then you see an automobile that's really really fancy, and then you're like, okay, is this in the 1910s or 1920s? The other thing is that that there was definitely a lot of, and one of the issues with Peckinpah is that there's definitely a lot of animal abuse. That sometimes when you see something like a bridge being blown up, and you see like horses falling into water, or you see like a train being slammed into another piece of train. You see like horses like flip or somersault, or you see horses go down a dune and they're somersaulting and other things like that. Like back then, they really didn't really care about animals' rights. And so like animals did get hurt in this movie, and then also too the scorpion and the ants in the beginning, like how they set them all on fire. Like there's definitely animal abuse in this movie, and Peckinpah was kind of known for that because people had the old mentality of like animals are not people, or you want to show how bad the Wild West is, you got to kind of show that these were people who didn't treat their animals like they're like they have a life form and other things like that. I also felt the movie ran on way way too long, and it was so long that I kind of fell asleep a few times in it. And I've watched this film before, but I did feel like I did kind of feel like it was too. I feel like the film like ran on way too longer than it needed to be. And then also when you watch the shootouts, like obviously, everybody's like seeing very violent films nowadays. You watch an episode of Family Guy, it's violent and gory, and so when I was watching the shootouts, like there wasn't a lot of just reaction by the audience. But I don't know, honestly, this is 2023, and as I said, like you watch like any like TV 14 show, or you even watch like Family Guy, and you see like I remember like one episode like Evil Stewie like cuts a person in half, and you see like their organs and everything like that. Like obviously that would never be shown in the 90s or whatever. So like when you watch the violence in this film, like a modern audience, um, it really doesn't have the same like impact. It doesn't have the same impact, but it works because they have great sound design with the weapons, and then they also do a really great job of just making the scene super super long, because obviously if you're in a shootout, sometimes it would be a long time because there's lots of different people firing. It is a battle, so I appreciate them doing it at a longer length versus just something super quick, because it kind of shows the extent of the destruction that's being caused. And even in like the Sergio Leone spaghetti westerns, like the whole like shootout in The Good, the Bad, the Ugly, like the climactic one, it's just one or two bullets fired, and it lasts a couple of seconds, but the tension to get to that point is astounding. But but in the Wild Bunch they do it differently. They're like, this is actually a battle. This is actually people being shot and destroyed. So they try to make it realistic, and I like that. I think The other thing that I would say is that like you had a lot of great actors in the film, but I really didn't get into the screenplay. I think that I just think that I really didn't get into it that much. And then also too, like I felt a little confused in the movie because I think that there was a scene where they were stealing a bunch of items and explosive for the Mexican army, and then what happens is another scene that stuff gets robbed, and then there's another scene where they have it again. So I felt a little confused, but also I was pretty tired, but I kind of just felt like I had a hard time following the film. And also too, like older films like The Wild Bunch, they were made to be long movies because this was back when movies were meant to be longer because they wanted to feel epic and all that stuff. So I do think if you took like 30, 40 minutes out of this movie, you would have had something way better. But overall, I'm happy that I watched it in theaters, and I think that this is a great film to watch. It's one of the most important Western films, but also one of the important American films ever made. And I think it's just to show you that you know what that if you want to make a movie authentic, go right ahead. I hate saying this, but I was misdiagnosed with a learning disability growing up, and you know what? There's always films like Forrest Gump or The Good Doctor or Rain Man where they kind of almost take a person with learning disability, and they kind of make them kind of humorous or happy or silly or aloof, or almost like they think differently. So let's just kind of like celebrate their traits and just see them for and just almost like see them as a little kind of quirky. So there's always a sense of just making these people with disabilities kind of like happy figures or whatever. But I think that if I ever make a film about somebody with mental health issues, I would show the deepness and the sadness and the insecurity and the emotional abuse a person feels because that's true to real life. So even in my example, like there's a power in just showing just how realistic it is, how realistic something is versus just the American myth. And I appreciate this film because I think that when you look at the John Wayne, the John Ford movies, and a lot of the other like American films, there's a sense of just feeling good afterwards. And like they said, that when you watch the Western, they were kind of meant to be like Disney films, where you would bring the whole family and see like the ultimate good guy face the ultimate bad guy. But in this film, it's more the bad guys and feeling sorry for the bad guys because they lose at the end. But also, the other idea is that showing a more realistic view where it was a bunch of people killing people. And that's all I have to say. And then there's one final thing. That there's another thing about Sam Peckinpah's style called Death in the West, and what that means is that a lot of his films take place around the 1910s, when 1910s or 1920s, when the Wild Wild West was dying down. Like this is just when okay, this is kind of like when technology was being advanced. So in America, they were trying to get rid of like these old rural towns and try to make them more modernized. Like with the whole entire FDR, the New Deal, building roads and everything like that. That kind of helped kill the Wild West. But even in the 1910s, 1920s, there was such an advance in technology that the old like gunslinging Wild Wild West was dying down, and then this is also kind of something that's talked about in the film, where these old mercenaries hanging out, drinking, having a great time, but their style of life is not forever, and they kind of know that. And that was also kind of true when you look in the 1960s. And Peckinpah born in the 1940s, like he served in World. I think Peckinpah was born in the 1920s, but he served in World War II. And I think really that that whole generation that he was a part of like being considered that you're great because you went through World War II. Um, and also during his time, that even though he saw violence and war, you don't show that in media because you want to keep it like the good old days. Like you see films in the 40s and 50s, how they kind of shied away from violence and create that image of America being sweet and beautiful and wholesome. He was one of those filmmakers to be like, no, that's just not true to reality. So he was part of a change of ethics almost to say that, you know what, when you really look at the world, it's not the 1940s or 1950s or early 1960s America that you see in the movies where it's all happy and jolly. And if there's a problem, it's easily worked out and there's not a lot of violence. So he was kind of one of the first filmmakers to be like, you know what, I'm changing film itself by showing that there really are issues with violence and sex and political corruption and people with corrupted ethics or people with convoluted ethics, like you see in the Wild Bunch. And then also too that that even though when you watch the Wild Bunch you are cheering for the bad guys, that another thing is that you almost agree with the bad guys' ethics. Like you're seeing another walk of life. And I think that's also very important because sometimes, you know, you look at a show like Naruto, like people like listening to what Pain has to say about his philosophy around peace and corruption, or Madara Uchiha, and you see like people quote the bad guys a lot. And some of it even stems from the Wild Bunch in the sense that you kind of can agree with some of the philosophy the bad guys have, which is you stick together to the end. Everything's worth fighting for. And sometimes, you know, a man's good as his word to the person he promises to. So there's a sense of like honor and duty, even in situations that could end up costing your life. So, you know, it's a very interesting film about like human ethics and all that. I'm happy to give you guys this review. I know I'm a little sick and I'm in bed, but I just feel like, you know what, this film was on my mind and I wanted to talk about it. I felt very disappointed when I watched the film in theaters because I did not. I really didn't like it. I just felt that it went on way too long. I also kind of felt a little lost in the movie, and I also felt a little confused when, you know, it looks like it takes place after the Civil War, and then also too, then you see some cars in it, and then you're like, okay, it's the 1910s or 1920s. So I really wish they did a better job, or even say like in 1860 something or in 19 something, this took place. You know, it would have made me feel a little less lost. There's something else I want to talk about with this film. That I appreciate that they had a bunch of flashbacks as well, like showing like the backstories of these characters, and that makes me really really happy because in a lot of movies you didn't do that, so it kind of adds a level of dimension. And even in Midnight Cowboy, like Midnight Cowboy did a bunch of like flashbacks, but they kind of didn't explain to you that there were flashbacks. You had to kind of figure it out, but they make it more direct in the Wild Bunch that there's a bunch of flashbacks in this movie, so it adds to another like psychological dimension of characters, and I don't think that's ever been done in a western to this degree. Like obviously in some of the Django films, you are kind of seeing some flashbacks of the character, or in Death Rides a Horse, you're seeing some flashbacks of what makes a character upset or pissed off, or want to go down their trail of bloodshed. But in the Wild Bunch, I think that sometimes when you see people in their flashbacks, like one of them like was cheating, one of them was having a relationship with this woman that's cheating on her husband. When you see that, you automatically feel a lot of different emotions because obviously the guy's a scumbag for, you know, being with a woman that's a cheater, and then also we understand those relationships where, you know what, we have love for somebody even though they're involved with somebody else. So you know, there's multi-layered feelings and emotions within all that, and I think that, you know what, there's a lot of like really thought about characters. Even though the film runs a little long, I really think they do a good job with taking their main characters, because there's three really, because even in the Wild Bunch there's six of them, but there's like really three main characters in the group, and they do a hell of a job with them. And I also think that I also appreciate a lot of the characters because there is a sense of comic relief because it can't just be dark and serious. So Peckinpah does a great job in this film. It's very easy to see like how a person like Quentin Tarantino can make his movies by watching a film like this, where it can be super violent, but there's scenes where you got to be serious, and there's scenes where you got to have some comic relief. But then you also have to kind of say, you know what, when you look at the full picture of what's going on, it is unfortunate that these people value their ethics versus valuing, their lives. And ultimately, they know that, the way that they live their life is going to lead to their deaths. And ultimately, they're happy with it because they're living the life that they want to live. But it's not good. It's not a good philosophy. If you're gonna have a life that, even though it's fun and thrilling, but gonna lead to a demise like that, why the fuck do that to yourself? Because life is beautiful and precious, and usually when we live a life of like a Walter White type of life, we know it's going to end up bad, and it's not worth it. And that's another thing. You think of Breaking Bad, you think of the Wild Bunch, 'cause it's the same idea that people just want to live on the edge of life, and they know it's not going to work out, and they go with it anyways. So just yeah, there's a lot of like morality issues with the Wild Bunch. I'm happy to watch it. I'm happy to review it to you guys because it is definitely a worthwhile film. I'm sorry that I'm a little sick today, but I'm happy I'm doing this video either way, just to get the message out. So that's all I have to say about the Wild Bunch, Sam Peckinpah in 1969.